Blood stained the white marble steps of St. Agatha's Cathedral, pooling around a woman society had always overlooked. She was heavy, invisible, just a baker making a delivery. Yet, she took 5 hollow-point bullets meant for the most powerful matriarch in New York. The aftermath tore the underworld apart. Beatrice Gallagher was used to being invisible. At 28 years old and a size 22, the world usually looked right past her, or worse, looked at her with a mixture of pity and quiet judgment. She found her sanctuary in butter, flour, and sugar. As the owner of The Sweet Rebellion, a tiny, struggling bakery nestled on a quiet corner in Dyker Heights, Brooklyn, Beatrice poured all her unspoken love into her pastries. It was a brisk Tuesday morning in October. The sky over New York City was a slate gray, promising rain. Beatrice, breathless and sweating lightly under her heavy wool coat, was carefully wresting a massive 3-tiered cassata cake out of the back of her beat-up delivery van. It was a special order for the annual Catholic Charities bake sale at St. Agatha's. She didn't know that the silver-haired woman standing near the cathedral's grand oak doors was Caterina Russo. She didn't know that Caterina was the mother of Dominic Russo, the ruthless head of the Russo crime syndicate, a man whose name was only whispered in the city's darkest alleys. To Beatrice, Caterina was just a beautifully elegant older woman, struggling to pick up a dropped rosary with arthritic hands. Setting the heavy cake box on the stone retaining wall, Beatrice hurried over. "Please, let me," Beatrice said, her voice soft. She bent down, her knees popping in protest under her weight, and retrieved the polished wooden beads. Caterina took the rosary, her sharp, dark eyes meeting Beatrice's warm hazel ones. For the first time in years, someone looked at Beatrice and didn't immediately glance at her waistline. Caterina looked into her eyes. "You have a gentle soul, child," Caterina murmured, her Italian accent thick and musical. "In this city, that is a rare currency. What is your name?" Beatrice," she replied, a blush rising to her plump cheeks. "Thank you, Beatrice. I'm Caterina." The exchange lasted no more than 30 seconds, but it was shattered by the deafening roar of a modified engine. A matte black SUV jumped the curb, its tires screaming against the pavement. The heavy cathedral doors swung open, and Caterina's 2 armed bodyguards stepped out, but they were a second too late. The tinted windows of the SUV rolled down, revealing 3 men in dark tactical gear. The cold steel barrels of suppressed automatic weapons protruded from the windows. Time slowed to a crawl. Beatrice didn't think. She didn't weigh the pros and cons. She didn't consider her own life, a life she often felt was too heavy, too burdensome, and too unloved. All she saw was a frail woman in the crosshairs of absolute violence. Driven by a primal protective instinct, Beatrice threw her entire body weight forward. She slammed into Caterina, wrapping her thick arms around the older woman, tackling her to the cold marble steps just as the air erupted in gunfire. Crack, 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 crack. The sound was deafening, a localized thunderstorm of lead and fire. Beatrice felt the impacts like sledgehammers tearing into her flesh. 1 in her left shoulder, 2 ripping into her side, 3 tearing through her lower back, 4 and 5 finding her right thigh. She let out a ragged, wet gasp as the pain, hot, white, and blinding, exploded through her nervous system. She collapsed fully over Caterina, pressing the Mafia matriarch into the safety of the stone stairs, completely shielding her with her own massive frame. The bodyguards finally returned fire, shattering the SUV's windows and forcing the driver to peel away into the Brooklyn traffic. Silence rushed back into the courtyard, broken only by the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, and Caterina Russo's frantic, trembling voice. "Help her! Sangue di Cristo! Help her!" Caterina screamed, her elegant Chanel suit stained with Beatrice's blood. She cradled Beatrice's pale, heavy hoary face. "Stay with me, sweet girl. You stay with me." Beatrice's vision blurred, the grey sky fading to pitch black. Her last thought wasn't of fear, but a strange, quiet peace. At least I did one good thing. The emergency room at Bellevue Hospital was instantly locked down. When Dominic Russo arrived, he brought the temperature of the room down by 10 degrees. Standing 6'3", dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit, Dominic was a storm of barely contained violence. Flanked by 6 heavily armed men, he bypassed triage and stormed straight into the VYP waiting area. He had received the call that his mother's detail was hit. The rival Moretti family had finally made a move. "Where is she?" Dominic's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that sent the hospital administrator stepping backward. "Dominic!" He turned to see Caterina, covered in dried blood, but entirely unharmed. Dominic rushed to her, falling to his knees and checking her over. "Ma, are you hit? Tell me where." "It's not my blood, mio figlio," Caterina said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and sorrow. She gripped her son's lapels with surprising strength. "A girl, a baker. She threw herself over me. She took the bullets, Dominic. Every single one." Dominic froze. In his world, people took bullets for him because they were paid to, or because they feared him. A civilian? A stranger? It was unheard of. The heavy double doors of the surgical wing swung open, and Dr. Aris Kaplan, the chief of trauma surgery, walked out, pulling down his bloody mask. He looked exhausted. "Mr. Russo," Dr. Kaplan started, knowing exactly who he was dealing with. "Your mother's savior is in the ICU. She survived the surgery, but it was incredibly close." "Give me the assessment, doctor," Dominic demanded, standing to his full, intimidating height. 5 gunshot wounds, Dr. Kaplan stated, consulting his iPad. 1 shattered the left clavicle. 2 in the right thigh, missing the femoral artery by millimeters. The other 2 struck her lower back and flank. The doctor paused, looking between Dominic and Caterina. "I have been a trauma surgeon for 20 years, and I have never seen anything quite like this. To be frank, Mr. Russo, the young woman's weight is the only reason she is not in the morgue right now." Dominic's brow furrowed. "Explain." "The rounds fired were 9mm hollow points. They are designed to expand and cause maximum internal damage upon impact. The 2 bullets that struck her back and side were aimed directly at vital organs. But Beatrice carries a significant amount of subcutaneous adipose tissue. Body fat. Her tissue density literally trapped the expanded bullets, slowing their velocity just enough before they could puncture her kidneys or her spine. Her body acted as a biological Kevlar vest. She saved your mother's life, and her own body composition saved hers." Caterina let out a choked sob, crossing herself. Dominic's jaw tightened. He walked to the reinforced glass window of the ICU. Inside, hooked up to a dozen monitors, a ventilator, and IV drips, lay Beatrice Gallagher. She was pale, her features swollen, her large body taking up the entirety of the hospital bed. She was the absolute antithesis of the women Dominic usually associated with, the plastic, skeletal models who clung to his arm at galas. Yet looking at her, Dominic felt a profound, heavy shift in his chest. A blood debt had been forged. In the Sicilian Mafia tradition, A life owed was a life bound. "The Morettis won't stop," Dominic said quietly, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's steady, shallow breathing. "They missed the target. When they find out a civilian intervened, they'll come to finish the job to send a message." As if on cue, a commotion erupted down the hallway. Dominic's second-in-command, a scarred enforcer named Leo, burst through the stairwell doors, dragging a man dressed in green hospital scrubs. The man was bleeding from a broken nose, a silenced pistol clattering onto the linoleum floor. "Caught him slipping through the service elevator, boss," Leo growled. "Moretti's trash. He was asking the nurses where the gunshot victim was kept." Dominic's eyes darkened to a terrifying obsidian. He didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. He simply walked over to the assassin, leaned down, and spoke in a whisper that made the hair on the back of Dr. Kaplan's neck stand up. "You tell Vincent Moretti that the girl is a Russo now. Anyone who looks at her, breathes near her, or speaks her name, dies." Dominic stood up, turning to his men. "Kill him. Leave his body in the trunk of Moretti's car." He then turned back to the terrified doctor. "Kaplan, get her stable for transport. Now." "Mr. Russo, she just had a thoracotomy. She cannot be moved." "If she stays here, she dies," Dominic interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm moving her to my private medical facility at the Montauk estate. You and your best nurses are coming with us. Name your price, doctor, because I am not asking." 36 hours later, Beatrice slowly clawed her way out of the darkness of anesthesia. The first thing she registered wasn't the sterile, chemical smell of a hospital, but the crisp, salty scent of the ocean mixed with a faint, intoxicating aroma of cedarwood and expensive cologne. She forced her heavy eyelids open. She wasn't in a cramped, clinical room. She was lying in a massive, king-sized mahogany bed with silk sheets. The walls were painted a soothing seafoam green, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against a private beach. Panic flared in her chest, but a sharp, agonizing pull in her ribs forced her to gasp and stay still. "Don't move, Beatrice." The voice came from the corner of the room, deep, resonant, and dripping with authority. Beatrice painfully turned her head. Sitting in a leather armchair, nursing a glass of amber liquid, was a man who looked like he had stepped off the cover of a dark romance novel and a most wanted poster simultaneously. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp and dusted with stubble, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. Where am I?" she croaked, her throat painfully dry. Dominic stood up, walking toward the bed with the silent, predatory grace of a panther. He poured a glass of ice water from a crystal pitcher on the nightstand, slipping a straw between her chapped lips. "Drink," he commanded softly. Beatrice drank, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Who are you?" "The hospital. Katerina." "My mother is safe," Dominic said, pulling a chair closer to her bedside. "Because of you." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his imposing frame dominating the space. "My name is Dominic Russo, and you, Beatrice Gallagher, are currently the most hunted woman in New York City." Beatrice's heart monitor began to beep frantically. "Hunted? I'm just a baker. I just wanted to deliver a cake. And instead, you took 5 bullets meant for the matriarch of the Russo family from the Moretti cartel," Dominic said, his gaze dropping momentarily to the thick, white bandages wrapping her torso and shoulder, a strange flicker of awe in his dark eyes. "They sent a hitman to the hospital to slit your throat," Dominic continued bluntly. "So I bought the floor, paid off the surgeons, and brought you to my fortress in Montauk. You belong to me now." Beatrice stared at him, her chest heaving. "I don't belong to anyone. I'm fat, I'm boring, and I have a bakery to run. Let me go home." A slight, almost imperceptible smirk touched Dominic's lips. It was the first time in years someone had dared to raise their voice at him. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently hovering over the bandage on her shoulder before tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was shockingly tender. "You're not going anywhere, Beatrice," Dominic whispered, his eyes locking onto hers, promising both danger and an inescapable sanctuary. "Your life was ordinary yesterday. Today, you are the shield of the Russo family, and I protect what is mine." Recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl through a fog of pain and painkillers, but Beatrice Gallagher never woke up alone. The Montauk estate was a fortress of glass, steel, and stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic. Inside, it was a gilded cage where Beatrice was treated with a reverence that terrified her. For the first 3 weeks, she couldn't walk. The damage to her thigh and lower back required extensive physical therapy, conducted in a private gym overlooking the ocean. Throughout it all, Dominic Russo was an inescapable phantom. He moved his entire operation to the estate. Capos and underbosses in $1,000 suits arrived daily, whispering in hushed, urgent tones in the sprawling library. But Dominic never let them near the East Wing, where Beatrice rested. When she screamed in pain during her physical therapy sessions, trying to put weight on her right leg, Dominic would appear in the doorway, his dark eyes fierce, his presence silent but overwhelming. He would dismiss the therapists with a sharp nod, kneel beside her, and massage her swollen, bruised leg, with hands that had undoubtedly taken lives, yet handled her like spun glass. "I'm too heavy for this," Beatrice sobbed one afternoon, burying her face in her hands. The physical therapist had just left after a grueling session. "My body. It's too much. The joints can't take the weight while healing. I'm disgusting, Dominic. Please just let me go back to my apartment." Dominic froze. He slowly stood up, grabbing a warm towel and gently wiping the sweat from her flushed, tear-streaked face. "Never say that word in my house again." Dominic's voice was a low, vibrating baritone that demanded absolute obedience. He stepped closer, crowding her space until all she could smell was his sandalwood cologne and the faint, metallic tang of danger that always clung to him. "Society told you that you take up too much space, Beatrice," Dominic murmured, his thumb tracing the curve of her soft, full jawline. "They made you feel ashamed of your softness. But I look at you, and I see a fortress. I see the armor that swallowed hollow-point bullets and kept my mother's heart beating. Your body is a temple forged in loyalty, and it is the most magnificent thing I have ever laid eyes on." Beatrice stopped breathing. She looked into his obsidian eyes, searching for pity or mockery. She found only raw, unadulterated obsession. As the weeks turned into a month, her mobility returned. The crushing isolation of the estate began to gnaw at her, so she turned to the only language she truly understood: baking. She commandeered the estate's massive, industrial-grade kitchen. The private chefs were quickly relegated to prep cooks, under the gentle but firm command of a woman who knew her way around a bag of flour. Beatrice baked to quiet her mind. She made sfogliatelle, cannolis, rustic sourdoughs, and towering chocolate torts. The mansion, usually smelling of expensive leather and gun oil, began to smell like vanilla, toasted almonds, and browned butter. Late one night, unable to sleep due to the lingering ache in her shoulder, Beatrice was in the kitchen, aggressively kneading a batch of brioche dough. She wore an oversized silk robe Dominic had bought her, the rich emerald fabric clinging to her generous curves. "You're punishing the dough, mia dolce," Beatrice gasped, spinning around. Dominic stood in the archway, the sleeves of his black dress shirt rolled up, exposing tattoos of crossed rosaries and Sicilian daggers on his forearms. He walked toward her, his gaze dropping to the dusting of flour on her chest and the heavy rise and fall of her breathing. "It helps the gluten develop," she whispered, suddenly hyper-aware of how isolated they were in the massive house. Dominic stepped behind her. He didn't touch her, but the heat radiating from his massive frame enveloped her. "Show me," he commanded softly. Trembling, Beatrice placed her hands back on the dough. Dominic slowly brought his hands up, resting his large, calloused palms over hers. He guided her motions, pressing down into the heavy dough, rolling and folding. The rhythm was hypnotic, deeply intimate. Every time he pressed forward, his chest brushed against her back. "Katerina is returning to the city tomorrow," Dominic murmured, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, sending a violent shiver down her spine. "The streets are bleeding, Beatrice. The Moretti family is desperate. They lost half their territory to my retaliation, and Vincent Moretti knows he is a dead man walking." Beatrice stopped kneading. "Why are you telling me this? I'm just a baker." Dominic turned her around, backing her gently against the marble island. His dark eyes were stormy, swirling with a terrifying vulnerability. "Because you are not just a baker anymore. You are the heart of this syndicate now. The men speak of you like a saint, the woman who bled for the family, and I—" He trailed off, his gaze dropping to her lips. "I am a man who has lived in the dark his whole life, Beatrice. You are the only light I can bear to look at." He leaned down, and when his lips met hers, it wasn't the brutal, forceful kiss of a mob boss. It was a desperate, starving plea. Beatrice gasped, melting against him. His hands tangled in her thick hair, pulling her flush against his hard body, making her feel small, protected, and completely cherished for the first time in her life. But the kiss was shattered by the shrill, deafening screech of the estate's perimeter alarms. Red emergency lights strobed violently through the kitchen windows. The sound of distant, suppressed gunfire echoed over the roar of the ocean. Dominic's demeanor shifted instantly. The vulnerable lover vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the New York underworld. He drew a custom 1911 pistol from a concealed holster at the small of his back. "The safe room. Now!" he barked, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the pantry. But before they could take 3 steps, the heavy oak doors of the kitchen were blown off their hinges by a concussive explosive. The blast threw Beatrice backward. She hit the floor hard, her recovering wounds screaming in agony as smoke and plaster rained down on the marble. Through the ringing in her ears and the thick grey smoke, Beatrice saw silhouettes moving into the kitchen, and the voice giving them orders wasn't Vincent Moretti's. It was a voice she recognized, a voice from inside the house. "Sweep the east corridors! Kill the guards! But I want the fat bitch alive! Vincent wants her head delivered in a cake box!" Beatrice scrambled under the massive stainless steel prep tables, covering her mouth to muffle her terrified breathing. The voice belonged to Leo, Dominic's trusted second-in-command, the man who had been eating her pastries just hours ago. Gunfire erupted as Dominic engaged the intruders. Beatrice could hear the terrifying, calculated precision of Dominic's shots. He was a one-man army, but he was outnumbered. "Dominic, you're slipping, boss," Leo taunted, taking cover behind the refrigerator banks as bullets shredded the kitchen. "You went soft over a civilian, a bakery girl. You jeopardized $100 million empire to play nurse to a whale. The Morettis offered me a 50% split. It's just business." Beatrice's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked around desperately. She was unarmed, injured, and terrified. But as she watched a laser sight sweep across the floor toward the island where Dominic was pinned down, a cold, terrifying clarity washed over her. She was Beatrice Gallagher. She had taken 5 bullets. She was not going to die cowering under a table while the man she loved was slaughtered. Above her, resting on a heavy gas burner, was a 20-quart commercial pot of sugar syrup she had been reducing for a caramel glaze. It had been boiling fiercely just minutes before the explosion. It was effectively liquid napalm. Ignoring the screaming pain in her shoulder, Beatrice used her heavy frame to her advantage. She braced her good leg against the floorboards and drove her shoulder upward, hitting the edge of the heavy stove range just as Leo flanked the island, his assault rifle raised toward Dominic's blind spot. Beatrice reached up, grabbed the heavy iron handle of the boiling pot, and with a feral, guttural scream, she hurled the entire 20 quarts of scalding, sticky sugar directly at Leo. The molten caramel hit the traitor square in the chest and face. Leo's shriek was unearthly, a sound of absolute, flesh-melting agony. The sticky syrup clung to his skin and clothes, burning through to the bone. He dropped his rifle, clawing frantically at his face, blindly stumbling backward into the shattered glass. The distraction was all Dominic needed. He vaulted over the marble counter and fired 2 rounds point blank into the remaining assassins before turning his gun on Leo. "You're right, Leo," Dominic said, his voice a chilling whisper that cut through the smoke. "I did go soft, because if I hadn't—" Bang! Leo collapsed, lifeless, onto the ruined kitchen floor. Silence descended on the estate, broken only by the hiss of broken gas lines and the distant wail of police sirens. Dominic dropped his weapon and ran to Beatrice, sliding to his knees and pulling her, trembling, heavy body into his chest. He buried his face in her neck, shaking uncontrollably. "You saved me," he choked out, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Again. You saved me." Beatrice clung to his shirt, tears streaming down her face. I think my brioche is ruined." Dominic let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, holding her as if letting go would unravel the universe. The aftermath of the Montauk siege shifted the tectonic plates of the criminal underworld. The discovery of Leo's betrayal and the subsequent annihilation of the Moretti family by a vengeful Dominic Russo became a legend whispered in the shadows of New York. But the true legend was the woman behind the Don. 3 months later, a private, highly secretive gathering took place in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The heads of the 5 families were in attendance, an unprecedented summit of power and wealth. They sat at a massive round table, men of violence and pride, waiting in hushed anticipation. The double doors opened. Dominic Russo walked in, but he wasn't leading. He walked half a step behind Beatrice. She wore a custom-made, midnight blue velvet gown that cascaded over her curves like liquid night. Her hair was styled in sweeping, golden-brown waves, and diamonds rested against her collarbones. But it wasn't the clothes that commanded the room. It was the way she carried herself. The timid baker from Brooklyn was gone. In her place stood a woman who had bled for the throne, who had faced down assassins, and who carried the heart of the most dangerous man in America in her hands. Caterina Russo, leaning heavily on a silver-tipped cane, stepped forward. The room fell dead silent. "Gentlemen," Caterina began, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers, "in our world we value blood, we value loyalty, but we often forget what true courage looks like. It does not always come in a tailored suit or carry a gun." Caterina turned to Beatrice, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavy, ornate gold ring, the signet of the Russo family matriarch, a ring that had not been worn since Caterina's husband was killed 30 years ago. "This woman," Caterina pointed a trembling finger at Beatrice, "stepped in front of a firing squad for a stranger. She took 5 hollow points into her own flesh. She shielded me. She shielded my son. Her body, her beautiful, strong body, is the only reason the Russo family stands before you today." Tears began to openly stream down Caterina's face. In the crowd, hardened killers, capos who had seen decades of bloodshed, bowed to their heads. Several men wiped their eyes, moved by the raw, undeniable truth of her sacrifice. In a life built on betrayal, absolute purity was overwhelming. Caterina took Beatrice's hand and slid the heavy gold signet ring onto her finger. "I name you the heart of our family, Beatrice," Caterina wept, pulling the younger woman into a fierce embrace. "You are our shield. You are our queen." Dominic stepped forward, dropping to one knee in front of the entire assembly. The room gasped. The ruthless Don Russo, kneeling. He took Beatrice's hand, pressing his lips to the signet ring, and then to her knuckles. "My life, my empire, my soul, yours," Dominic vowed, looking up at her with a devotion that transcended the mortal world. "Until the sea goes dry." Beatrice looked down at the man she loved, then out at the room of powerful men who now bowed their heads to her in deep, unwavering respect. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer too heavy, too much, or unloved. She was the immovable object that had broken the unstoppable force of the Mafia's darkest enemies. The Sweet Rebellion Bakery eventually reopened in Brooklyn, heavily fortified and guarded by men in dark suits who happily ate sfogliatelle while watching the perimeter. And inside, kneading dough with a gold signet ring on her finger, was Beatrice Russo, the baker who took 5 bullets, conquered a Mafia king's heart, and left an entire underworld in tears. Beatrice proved that true strength doesn't come from the size of your waist, but the size of your heart and the courage to protect what you love. She went from an invisible baker to the undisputed queen of the underworld. Did you expect that boiling sugar twist? Let us know in the comments. If this story left you in tears or had your heart racing, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more epic, dramatic stories. Which part was your favorite? Comment below.